Coming up on Headline Humboldt, local communities continue their efforts to clean up and recover from a magnitude 6.4 earthquake that rattled the North Coast early Tuesday morning, leaving 2 dead and several people injured. We'll sit down with local geologist and longtime Cal Poly Humboldt professor Lori Dengler to talk about the quake, its magnitude when compared with earthquakes of the past, and why we should all be paying more attention to this kind of threat. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. If you've lived any length of time on the North Coast, you've been through earthquakes. Most pass without even catching our attention, but occasionally our community gets shaken deep and hard by the temperamental earth beneath our feet. This week's quake, occurring this past Tuesday morning at just after 2:30 a.m., was one such rattler and left homes up and down the county damaged, major municipalities and even the state declaring emergencies, dozens of homes red-tagged, and water systems in Rio Dell and Fortuna damaged to the point that officials are asking residents to boil their water before consuming. 2 people died from lack of immediate medical care and dozens of injuries have been reported. Despite these reports, we're remarkably lucky that more damage wasn't done. The city of Rio Dell appears to be the hardest hit, and the historic Fern Bridge was closed for more than 24 hours as crews worked to assess and repair the structural damage. As of Thursday afternoon, some 26 homes in Rio Dell had been deemed unsafe. Roughly 65 local residents had been displaced. 9 of those were provided with free hotel rooms, and there was also an overnight shelter provided. An additional 37 homes have been yellow tagged, damaged in the quake, but safe enough to live in. At one point, power was out for roughly 70,000 local residents. As of Thursday, however, power has largely been restored across Humboldt County. Here's Sheriff William Hansel at a press conference in Rio Dell earlier this week.
Today we have Sheriff Hansel. Behind me, Kyle Knopp, who's the city manager of Rio.
Wow.
Yeah.
As you felt here, there's been over 50 aftershocks since the initial 6.4 earthquake at 2:37 in the morning. Our priority from the very beginning is life. And so we are concerned about our residents here in the county. And so the first thing we are doing is checking on our residents and making sure that they are okay and providing the needs for them at this present time. But at this point in time, we are coordinating the disaster response for the county. We're coordinating with local officials. We have fire, EMS, law enforcement, as well as state resources. We have CAL FIRE, we have CHP, we have California Office of Emergency Services here. All that to make sure that we are providing the best services to our people at this given time. We know that people have been injured from this. We also had 2 deaths associated from this earthquake. It was a 72-year-old and an 83-year-old individual who did not see or did not get timely medical care because their medical emergency happened at the moment of the earthquake. And so EMS could not get there in time and couldn't deliver them to the proper medical facility. So our hearts and prayers go out to their families. It is very sad when we have loss of life. And so that's the one primary thing that we're looking for right now, is to make sure our residents are taken care of.
When such a disaster strikes, the go-to person on the North Coast for information has been and remains Cal Poly professor Lori Dengler, Cal Poly Humboldt professor Lori Dengler, who has spent her career studying the movements of the earth and trying to get the rest of us to pay attention to this ever-present danger. Thanks for joining us, Lori.
Thank you. And my sincere concern for all of you who just went through something very, very frightening. You really do have a right to be angry and frightened and not like earthquakes, because this one was no fun.
Yeah. I have a neighbor in my back who lives sort of in the back of our house, and she was up at 2:45 throwing belongings into the back of her car ready to leave Humboldt County for good because she didn't like that earthquake. So.
Yeah, earthquakes in the night are particularly unpleasant. And I was very fortunate in that I happened to be in Sacramento on the 3rd floor of a hotel when my phone alerted me that shaking was coming. I didn't realize where the shaking might be coming from, and fortunately, I did not feel a thing. And this is one earthquake I'm actually very glad to have missed.
Now, we were talking before the show about the difference between magnitude and strength, and on the scale, it looks like it was 6.4, but you mentioned something about its actual power belies that number. Could you explain that again?
Yeah, people tend to get confused about a lot of things with earthquakes. And one of the big sources of confusion is magnitude versus strength of shaking. And most people tend to think that the larger that magnitude number, the stronger the earthquake should be. And there is a sort of general correlation. I mean, a magnitude 3 earthquake is not going to feel as strong as a magnitude 5 or 6. Right. But once you get into the 5, 6, 7 range, the strength of shaking, which we actually measure by acceleration, the rate of change of speed, everyone should be somewhat familiar with acceleration. If you're driving a car and you're at 0 and you go to 60, and it takes you 2 hours to get from 0 to 60, you're not going to feel very much force. You're just going to kind of move along slowly. Yeah. But if you go from 0 to 60 in 1 second, it's going to slam you back against your seat. And it's that slamming force in an earthquake. The faster the rate of the speed of the ground changes, the more likely you are to do damage. Yeah. And in this particular case, this 6.4 earthquake, of which we've had a lot. In fact, we had a 6.2 exactly 1 year ago.
Right.
Each magnitude 6 earthquake is not a clone of the other. And this one produced some of the strongest ground shaking, the strongest accelerations ever recorded in the state of California. Wow. My guess is it's going to be in the top 5. The strongest accelerations were recorded back in '92 at the Cape Mendocino earthquake. Only one spot right at Cape Mendocino exceeded 2 Gs. I mean, that would have been enough to bounce you in the air. And it did bounce a Caterpillar D9 tractor that was very close to there, up into the air and over and back down again.
Oh my gosh.
But in most of the populated areas, this earthquake was stronger, certainly much stronger in Rio Del and in Fortuna than the '92 quakes. So this was a big one. Just because it was 6.4 doesn't mean it's not a big one. And the ground accelerations were really quite extraordinary. As we go up in magnitude, I doubt if anyone in Rio Del or Fortuna will ever feel a stronger earthquake, even if we have a magnitude 8 or a magnitude 9. The accelerations, that push, is not likely to be any stronger. The difference is it will last a lot longer. I know for many people this earthquake felt like it went on forever, but the strong motion was less than 10 seconds of really strong shaking. Might have gone on a little longer with the more mild shaking. A larger magnitude earthquake will last longer, and a really large earthquake can last several minutes.
Yeah. I wanted to clarify a couple bits of misinformation that I've been hearing, or find out if they are misinformation. A lot of people were saying that there was actually 2 earthquakes overnight. That's not what happened, correct? I mean, there was an aftershocks, but they were later. Is that true?
Well, there certainly were aftershocks. The largest aftershock was, I believe, a 4.6, but it occurred, I don't have the exact time, but it was certainly well after the earthquake. Okay. But many people will perceive an earthquake as 2 shakes because they will feel the initial P wave, which is generally more of an up and down motion, and sometimes a little faster, but generally not quite as strong. And then 5-10 seconds later, depending on how close they are to the epicenter, they'll feel the stronger S wave, the secondary motion, which is side to side. It's usually the S waves that cause the damage. So a lot of people will say, oh, my dog predicted the earthquake. Well, and then, my dog started barking and then the earthquake happened. Well, the dog is much more likely to feel the relatively weaker P wave than you are, especially if you've been sleeping. The dog will wake up before you will.
Yeah. Fascinating. And then another bit of misinformation or mistaken, you were talking a little bit before about how this might be a precursor quake, and there's no evidence for that, right?
Well, all earthquakes are part of sequences, and we can guarantee there'll be aftershocks. We've already had over 100 aftershocks. As I say, at this point, the largest is a 4.6. And the usual rule of thumb is that the largest aftershock is about 1 magnitude unit less than the main earthquake. So we could still expect that we could have a magnitude 5, 5.2 in the next week, although every day that passes makes that likelihood a little bit lower.
Okay.
Probability and likelihood is another thing that people get very confused about. And so when the U.S. Geological Survey issues an aftershock probability forecast, they'll talk about there's, like a 50% probability of magnitude 3 and 4 aftershocks in the first week. They'll talk about a smaller probability for larger aftershocks. And then at the very bottom, they'll say there is a very small chance, and in this case, about 1 in 2,000, that's a small chance, that we could have an earthquake as large or larger. Now, it turns out in Humboldt County, we always have the likelihood of a large or larger earthquake. That's practically on that order. So what I always tell people, this is probably the largest earthquake that you're going to experience in the next few months, maybe even the next few years. But there's always a small but real probability that we could have a larger earthquake from the Triple Junction area or on one of the many other faults in the Humboldt County region.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, Humboldt County, as I've been told, is one of the most seismically active areas in the country, right?
Absolutely. We are the earthquake king or queen of the coterminous 48 states.
Wow.
We account for roughly 46% of the total seismic energy released in that region. Obviously, from year to year, it can be different. But if you look at the last 50 or so years, we account for nearly 50% of that total seismic energy released. The only part of the United States that beats us is Alaska, and they have bigger faults, more earthquakes, and I'm glad that we are second to them. The reason why we have so many earthquakes is our unique geologic setting, where we have these 3 giant plates and 3 major fault systems that all kind of come together in the Cape Mendocino area. The Cape Mendocino area is called the Triple Junction area, and it's where the North American plate, the Gorda plate, which is offshore of Humboldt County and beneath our feet, and the Pacific plate, which is south of Cape Mendocino along the coast, all meet. Now, it's these last 2 big earthquakes, the 2 December earthquakes, and there's nothing special about December. It's pure coincidence.
I was going to point that out. That we can't predict earthquakes like that. It's not going to happen next year. Most likely.
Pure coincidence that these last 2 December earthquakes, they're all, I would argue, associated with the Triple Junction.
Okay.
This complex region where these 3 plates are kind of grinding together and have created a gazillion small fault systems. So the earthquake that happened a year ago and the one that just happened, they're on different slivers, different faults, and they had different fault motion. And that's one of the reasons that we experience them differently.
Sure.
The December 2021 earthquake was felt very strongly in Petrolia, much weaker to the north. This earthquake was relatively weak in Petrolia. I have a friend who lives in Petrolia, and the pictures on his walls didn't even come down. But it really packed a punch to the north, especially to Rio Del and Fortuna. The ground shaking measurements in Rio Del were about 10 times stronger than the ground shaking in Petrolia, even though both communities were roughly the same distance from the epicenter.
Wow. Now, one of the things that we hear a lot about in the media around here, and also that the media tries to report a lot, is the risk that we have from this, recurring Cascadia subduction zone megaquake. Is there any way that these earthquakes along the Trimble Junction affect the probability or likelihood of those Cascadia subduction zone quakes? Does it ease off pressure, or are they totally unrelated?
I would argue for the latter.
Okay.
I think what's happening in the vicinity of the Triple Junction is really independent of what's happening along the Cascadia subduction zone, what's happening on the San Andreas Fault, what's happening on the Mendocino Fault. These bigger fault systems are being powered by the larger plate motions. So it's this kind of corner crunch that is going on in the Cape Mendocino area that creates a lot of magnitude 2s, 3s, 4s, occasional 5s and 6s. Probably the largest earthquake we would expect in the immediate sort of Triple Junction area is what we experienced in 1992. That was a 7.2.
Okay.
In order to get a bigger earthquake, you need a bigger fault system. And in order to get a bigger fault system, we have to look for some of these more regional types of faults. So faults within the Gorda Plate that frequently produce 6s and 7s. Fortunately, most of those are offshore or fairly far offshore. But we certainly have had some, like the one in 1980, which destroyed a lot of my house when I lived in West Haven, my first Humboldt County earthquake, very scary in the middle of the night. Popped a span off of the Tompkins Hill overpass. Fortunately, we have much better bridges thanks to Caltrans and thanks to regulations in California, because Tuesday's earthquake definitely would have popped bridges off of 101 if they were still in the state that they were in back in 1980.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that people often worry about associated with an earthquake, and as you well know, you helped to draw this connection, but the tsunami threat. And I was talking to one geologist, and they were saying that often, if the earthquake doesn't last long, then maybe the threat of a tsunami is sort of lessened by relation. So if you're counting 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 when an earthquake is happening, if you get up to 20, that's when you should really start worrying about evacuating to higher ground. Would you agree with that logic?
When we first started putting out information messages about tsunami threat, we told people count, and we argued, should it be 15, should it be 20, should it be 30? Mm-hmm. And then we realized that this is really confusing people. And I've now made it much simpler.
Okay.
It's like, okay, yes, earthquake shaking and how long the shaking lasts is a sign of the magnitude. And the bigger the magnitude, the more likely you are to produce a tsunami. So I feel an earthquake, and it's over before I've really had a chance to kind of pay attention. That earthquake won't produce a tsunami. Then, gotcha. Let's say I feel an earthquake, and it goes on and on forever. And I'm going, this earthquake is longer than anything I have ever felt. That is going to be a red flag. This is that earthquake that Lori and everyone else has been talking about.
Yeah.
No question in my mind that this earthquake has gone on forever. I haven't bothered to count, but I know that it's an eternity.
Yeah.
Definitely, I'm going to evacuate. So we've got then all these earthquakes in between that I call the sort of tweeners. And if I had been here and on the beach or in a tsunami zone, early Tuesday morning and I felt that earthquake, I would have done exactly what Troy Nicolini did. Troy is the warning meteorologist, or he's the meteorologist in charge
Yeah.
at our National Weather Service office.
Absolutely.
And he and his family live in Fairhaven. And they're definitely in a tsunami zone, but they have a high sand dune that we think is high enough just sort of behind their house. And so while the ground was still shaking, as soon as they could kind of safely move, all of them, including their young son and their dog, they were all off grabbing their grab and go kits and up on top of that dune within 4 minutes.
Yeah.
By the time the National Tsunami Warning Center had actually issued the statement that this earthquake did not produce a tsunami. They did exactly what they should have done. When in doubt, drill it out, because every opportunity like this, whether it's in the middle of the night in a rainstorm, is an opportunity to cut down the indecision time. Social scientists say typically it takes 5 minutes for most people after feeling an earthquake to sort of get themselves together to start to evacuate. And in Japan, it turned out those 5 minutes would actually kill people. The more time you delay before you evacuate.
Wow.
So if you live or work in a tsunami zone or are walking on the beach and you feel an earthquake and you can't say that was short, then you need to use it as your sign to get to high ground.
Yeah. You know, you guys in October of this past year had the Great Shakeout event. I'm curious to see, I mean, do you think that helped to improve our response as far as it goes, or do you think that more needs to be done? I mean, how do you feel like Humboldt County graded out, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think we are one of the most aware and prepared and knowledgeable communities anywhere in California. I'm really proud of the work that both individuals, families, businesses, and our government partners have done. And part of it is doing a lot more sort of exercises and evacuation drills and, involving the larger community. But there's always room for more. And especially with earthquakes. I can't tell you how many people told me the day after the earthquake is, I knew about earthquakes. I knew I should have done something about that bookcase. I knew I should have done something about having shoes by my bed. But, there were other things on my mind, like Christmas and like my job and, other things that take higher priority.
Yeah.
And that's always the big problem with earthquakes, is that we're least interested in the seconds before that earthquake happens, and we're most interested in the seconds after it happens. So we have this psychological problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and so would you argue that it's actually right now that you're probably best able to focus on the task at hand and create that go bag and make those changes that could really make the difference?
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. So much of what happened in this earthquake was directly in our own hands. Yeah. The government isn't going to come in and secure the bookcase to the wall, right? We wouldn't even want them to. That's in our court. Putting latches on our kitchen cabinets, that's in our court. Using little sticky tack or museum tape, those beautiful figurines, your great grandmother's china, having those things secured. I'm not a perfect preparer. I have many friends who are much, much more prepared than I am. But there are certain things that I've done that really helped a lot. One of them is that when we remodeled our kitchen, I asked Joanne Shook, a wonderful woodworker, find me earthquake latches. And she did. She found these wonderful little Japanese latches that were designed for RVs that you can easily push the cabinet and pop it open. So they're easy to use, yet in shaking, they stay shut.
Yeah, Lori,
we were nervous when we came home after 12 hours after the earthquake, when we looked at our kitchen and not a single cabinet had popped open.
Excellent.
But we should have had a little warning that said, careful, contents may have moved in transit, like the airlines. Because when I did open the cabinet, a number of plastic bottles that had been on the top all came flying down. Fortunately, they were all plastic.
All right, Lori, we're out of time. I got to let you go.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Thanks for all your efforts and expertise. Humboldt County is lucky to have you, and thanks for being on our show.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll talk to you again, hopefully before the next earthquake. We'll be right back after this short break.
In response to the 6.4 magnitude earthquake that hit Humboldt County, here's a list of helpful resources and information. The American Red Cross has established an overnight shelter for all community members located at the Roner Park Fireman's Pavilion, 9 Park Street in Fortuna. There's access to temporary indoor overnight shelter accommodations, meals, water, electricity, and earthquake information. Animal sheltering is also available at this location. For further information, please refer to the Humboldt Office of Emergency Services website. Rio Dell and Fortuna residents, do not drink the water without boiling it first. Let it boil for 1 minute and cool before using, or use bottled water. Rio Dell citizens may utilize the 2 dumpsters located outside of Rio Dell City Hall at 675 Wildwood Avenue to dispose of earthquake debris. Please do not dispose hazardous waste in these receptacles. Fernbridge is now open to one-way controlled traffic. Travelers should expect delays as repair work continues. Please use caution when traveling in the area.
According to the Humboldt County Office of Emergency Services, an earthquake and its aftermath can be both physically and emotionally overwhelming. Officials advise talking with members of your family about how they are feeling. Children and older adults are of special concern in the aftermath of disasters. Contact local volunteer agencies, professionals, or faith-based organizations for counseling. You can also reach out to neighborhood or community organizations and get involved. According to OES Services, your voice is important in deciding how your community will recover and rebuild in the years to come. Similarly, county officials are warning that residents should take care as they begin cleaning up to keep themselves safe and document that damage. OES officials are advising that people record and photograph all damages, as having such a record may be necessary for insurance claims and other recovery programs and services. Residents can report earthquake damage to the Humboldt County Office of Emergency Services at humboldtgov.org. When actual cleanup begins, use caution, wear protective clothing, including a long-sleeve shirt, long pants, work gloves, and sturdy, thick-soled shoes. Do not try to remove heavy debris by yourself. People with asthma and other lung conditions or immunity issues should not enter buildings with indoor water leaks or mold growth that can be seen or smelled. Children should not take part in disaster cleanup at all. Please report gas leaks immediately at 1-800-743-5000. And here's the number for the OES Services, a point of contact for reporting damages and other questions surrounding earthquakes. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned, stay informed, and Merry Christmas.